Simply economic, simply simply economics. Big ideas made small. Everyday money talk for any mind at all. Simply economics. Learn fast, feel smart. One quick listen and you're ready to start.
Have you ever been standing on a busy street corner, right outside a major subway station or in the middle of downtown, and you just see something that doesn't quite make sense?
I think I know where you're going with this.
You look up and there's a Starbucks, and then right next to it is a local independent shop and maybe even a third big chain, all like within a stone's throw of each other. It just feels wrong, like a huge risk.
Right. It looks like total chaos, but I promise you, it's actually the purest form of calculated urban economics you can find.
Okay.
So today, for this deep dive, our mission is to get past that surface level observation and really unpack the cold, hard logic that guides those exact location choices. We want to give you the framework that explains why that specific corner is worth, say, $1 million a year in rent.
And we're going to be digging into some pretty core economic concepts here, things you probably don't hear about much outside of a university lecture. We're talking about land rent theory.
Right, and the principles of urban economics, and something that's surprisingly high-tech, which is detailed foot traffic analysis.
It all sounds very complex.
Well, it all hinges on one crucial and often really brutal trade-off that every single business owner has to face. It's this tension between the incredibly high cost of rent
Right.
and the expected revenue that one single strategic location can actually generate. If that location can't promise huge sustainable sales, the whole thing just collapses. It's a very unforgiving equation.
So I guess we have two core questions to answer for you today. First, what are the economic factors that make a location valuable enough to command these just insanely high prices?
And second, how does a cafe actually calculate if all that foot traffic really justifies the monumental cost?
Let's start there then. What defines a high rent area?
So what's fascinating is that high rents aren't arbitrary at all. They're just the market's way of pricing a location's inherent. It's economic productivity.
It's productivity.
Yeah. In urban economics, a location's value is determined almost entirely by its visibility and its accessibility.
Yeah.
Basically, its ability to move goods and, more importantly, people as efficiently as possible.
So we're talking about those places that are just geographically perfect bottlenecks for human movement.
Exactly.
Like transit hubs, super busy street corners, the dead center of the city, anywhere that just naturally funnels thousands of people past your front door.
That's it. And this is where we need to bring in land rent theory. This goes way back to thinkers like David Ricardo, and in the urban context, von Thunen. They basically explain that businesses are in a constant bidding war for the most accessible plots of land.
Why? What's so special about them?
Because those plots minimize the customer's search costs and their transport costs.
Okay, help me wrap my head around that. Is land rent theory just a sort of fancy way of saying location, location, location?
It's the economic engine behind that cliche. Think of it like a graph, something called the bid rent curve. As you move away from the super accessible city center, the central business district, the cost of rent just drops off a cliff.
Okay, that makes sense.
But at the same time, the costs for the business and for the customer start to rise.
Right, because the farther out you go, the more I, as the customer, have to spend on gas or time or just effort to get to you, which means fewer people are going to make that trip.
Precisely. The city center is where your potential revenue is highest because that's where the customer base is densest. Land rent theory shows us that businesses will pay more and more rent right up until the point where the extra cost of that rent equals the extra revenue they get from that amazing location.
So there's a break-even point.
Exactly. It's sometimes called the zero profit boundary. If you pay any more rent, you lose money. If you pay less, you're leaving money on the table because you're not in the best possible spot.
So businesses aren't just paying for the square footage. They're paying what is essentially a premium access fee, a fee for just being close to all that potential cash.
Yes.
I remember reading about a tiny kiosk on a corner in Midtown Manhattan, and I think the rent was something like $20,000 a month. That really puts the pressure you're talking about into perspective.
It absolutely does. And that is the central trade-off. A business has to weigh that huge fixed monthly rent payment against the need to secure way, way higher expected revenue in that one spot. If that revenue doesn't show up, they've overpaid and they will fail fast.
Which brings us to the next logical step. How does a cafe confirm that the foot traffic is actually high enough to justify that kind of rent? I mean, it can't just be a gut feeling. What kind of data goes into making a $100,000 a month bet?
This is where modern, meticulous foot traffic analysis comes in. And it's gone way beyond just having a guy stand on the corner with a clicker.
Hey, what's that?
Today, location is the single biggest factor that determines three really interconnected things: visibility, foot traffic, and maybe most importantly, demand.
Okay, explain the difference there between traffic and demand. They seem like they'd be the same thing.
That's a great question. So traffic is just volume, the raw number of people walking past your door. Demand is the chance that those people will actually stop and buy something. We aren't just looking for a lot of people. We're looking for buying intent and what you might call tempo. A spot right next to a commuter train platform has unbelievable traffic, but the demand is all about high frequency, low dwell time. It's grab and go. The speed of the transaction is everything.
So the cafe in that spot needs to be built for pure speed. A small footprint, an efficient line, get people in and out.
Exactly. Now let's contrast that with a high rent spot in, say, a wealthy residential neighborhood. The traffic volume might actually be lower, but the demand is low frequency, high dwell time.
Meaning people want to sit down, work, meet their friends. They're going to take up space for a while.
And the economics of your store have to reflect that difference. You need to prioritize seating and comfort, not just pure speed. If you misunderstand that difference between traffic flow and buying tempo, you will completely miscalculate the revenue you need to survive.
That's a really fascinating breakdown. So it means they need data that tells them who these people walking by are. How do they actually get that kind of insight?
Well, the methods are surprisingly high-tech. A big chain, they use things like AI counter systems to track volume and even the direction people are walking.
Wow.
But more importantly, they use anonymized geofencing data from mobile phone carriers and apps. This data can show them generally where those passersby live and work.
Which tells them if the traffic is made up of high-value daily commuters or, I don't know, less predictable tourists.
That's exactly it. And they'll combine that with historical sales data from competing shops nearby if they can get their hands on it.
So that high rent is really a reflection of the location's proven ability to deliver a very specific high-value type of customer. It's like buying a guaranteed customer funnel, but that guarantee is incredibly expensive.
It is. Let's go back to our example. That cafe in the city center across from a huge office tower. They've used all this data to pick their spot. They might need to sell, say, 800 lattes every single day just to break even on rent and costs.
800, that's a brutal number.
Yeah.
But what about the other cafe, the one tucked away on a quiet side street?
Right. The side street shop has dramatically lower rent and much lower natural traffic. But because their fixed overhead is so much smaller, they might only need to sell, 150 lattes a day to cover their costs.
So the required sales volume just completely changes depending on where you are on that bid rent curve we talked about. High rent demands high volume.
High rent demands a high volume of high tempo transactions. That's the key takeaway.
Okay, this logic definitely explains why a single expensive corner is worth fighting for. But this brings us back to the original puzzle. Why do multiple cafes sometimes cluster together? If a location is so valuable, why on earth would you share it with two competitors on the same block?
I know, on the surface, it really looks like mutually assured destruction, doesn't it?
It really does.
But spatial competition often pushes businesses to cluster. It's a deliberate and often very smart strategy. While you are, yes, sharing the existing customers, the benefit of shared foot traffic and reduced search costs for the consumer often outweighs that direct competition.
You mentioned search costs. How does a cluster reduce search costs for me, the buyer?
By concentrating all the supply in one place, the businesses make the decision easier and faster for you. Let's say you need a very specific brand of running shoes. You don't just drive around hoping to find a store, right?
No, I'd go to the mall or that one street downtown that has all the shoe stores.
Exactly. You go to the footwear district because you know the probability of finding exactly what you want is highest there.
I see. So the concentration of shops selling similar things actually draws in a bigger overall pool of customers. It pulls people from a much wider area than any one store could on its own.
That's the clustering effect. It creates a destination. Whether it's a specific coffee street or a food court in a transit hub, you, the consumer, are willing to travel farther because you are guaranteed to have options. The increased density of demand justifies having multiple similar businesses, even with the high rent. They're sort of collectively generating the market they all feed on.
It's like an economic gravity well. The competition itself increases the gravitational pull on customers. How do you stand out in that cluster? If you have two big chains side by side, how do they both afford the rent?
It comes back to that massive volume. They survive because the overall market they've created together is just enormous. They differentiate on tiny details.
Yeah.
Brand loyalty, which your line moves faster,
Yeah.
specialty menu item, things like that. In those super high volume spots, if you can capture just 30% of the high value traffic walking by, you're still profitable despite the rent and the competition.
Okay, so that explains the winners of the rent war. But what about the cafe that just can't afford that city center rent? Or, maybe wisely chooses to avoid it altogether? What's the alternative strategy?
That is the equally calculated niche location strategy. And these places are defined by having much, much lower traffic and, crucially, proportionally lower rent. Their whole game is different.
How so?
They are not competing for that general rush hour crowd. They are competing for a hyper-specific captive audience.
So they're looking for a small, guaranteed audience instead of fighting for a piece of the huge but fractured audience downtown.
The main goal of the niche strategy is simply to avoid direct competition, to create a kind of geographical monopoly. Instead of relying on general visibility, the business targets specific customer bases whose needs are really localized and whose travel options are low.
Give me a concrete example of a captive customer base.
Okay, think about a cafe located inside a restricted access corporate campus, or maybe deep inside a major hospital complex.
Right.
The foot traffic outside the hospital might be high, but the traffic inside is constrained. The workers, the visitors, they need coffee, but the barrier to leaving the building, security, long walks, time, it's just too high. So they buy locally, almost regardless of the price. The rent is low because the general public can't get in, but the demand from that captive audience is almost certain.
This is where it gets really interesting, because now that tiny, maybe slightly overpriced cafe on the second floor of a new apartment building, that doesn't look like a desperate choice anymore.
No.
It looks like a calculated, protected strategy to lock down a market that their downtown competitors literally cannot reach.
It is entirely calculated. They've solved that same rent revenue equation, but they did it by minimizing the cost side and maximizing the certainty of the revenue side. They trade high volume for high stability. It just goes to show that this economic theory is applied just as rigorously by the small neighborhood shop as it is by the giant chain downtown.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this whole deep dive. At the end of the day, it seems the choice of where a cafe opens is just a pure, cold calculation. It's all about matching the expected revenue to the cost of the rent on that bid-rent curve.
That's the powerful conclusion, really. Location is the most critical variable. It determines everything: visibility, foot traffic, demand. And whether that cafe is in a bustling competitive cluster or serving a small protected niche, the price of that square footage is simply the market recognizing the measurable economic value it gets from being in that advantageous position.
So now that you understand land rent theory and this brutal trade-off between rent and sales, try applying this kind of thinking to other businesses you see every day, not just retail.
Oh, that's a great point.
Think about something necessary but, less glamorous, like a dry cleaner or a dentist. Where would they logically set up shop?
Those are fantastic examples because they need a completely different kind of traffic.
Yeah.
A dentist doesn't need 800 commuters rushing past.
Right. They need to be close to dense residential areas or have really good, easy parking for their appointments or be near high-income patients. It's a totally different kind of accessibility that justifies their rent.
Absolutely. So keep observing the world through this economic lens. The entire layout of our cities is structured by these invisible, unforgiving equations. It just shows how this theory applies to almost every real-world market decision we see. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Simply Economics. We hope this discussion helped make today's economic concept clearer and more relevant to real life. If you found this episode useful, feel free to share it with others who are interested in understanding economics beyond the textbook. You can find Simply Economics on YouTube, Spotify, and Podbean. In our next episode, we'll continue exploring how economic theory applies to everyday decisions and real-world markets. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Simply Economics.